Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Laura, for arranging this interaction that I am sure will be very fruitful for issues that we have been discussing for the past few days and that are very relevant for all of our countries. Your Excellency Valentin Rybakov, Deputy Minister of Belarus, thank you for joining us. Daniel Titelman of ECLAC, Pascal Sanaman of OECD, all of the permanent representatives that have joined us this morning. We understand that the issue at hand is, as I have said, very important to development in each of our countries and to development at a global level in order to be able to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. I would like to begin just with a sincere gratitude to all of you for being here this morning to be part of this discussion and to continue discussing how developing countries balance the demands for cooperation in tax matters and for increased transparency, while at the same time ensuring the resources continue to flow to finance the Sustainable Development Goals agenda. Panama, like all countries in the international community, has accepted with optimism and a strong political commitment the Sustainable Development Goals, which have been incorporated into our national regulations and the government's strategic plan. We have also taken the necessary actions to initiate the implementation at all levels in that regard. And taking into account the approaches of the Addis Ababa Action Plan, we are evaluating different strategies to ensure that resources are effectively allocated for our development. We clearly understand the issue of resources being available to finance the agenda, and I think that is the basis of this discussion. The economic environment shows clear signs of contraction worldwide, with hints of economic improvement in 17 and 18, especially in emerging markets and developing economies, although some regional circumstances should be taken into account. The Addis Ababa Action Agenda of the Third International Conference on Financing for Development represents the overall efforts by member states to eradicate poverty in all its forms and dimensions. In the last year, actions have begun to mobilize public and private resources and finance flows and to adjust policies to sustainable development. Its effective implementation gives us the space for individual action and cooperation to increase investments in sustainable development with the ultimate goal of boosting global growth and achieving SDG compliance. The report presented by the Interagency Task Force constitutes the basis of the work of the Financing for Development Forum, which we are holding this week. The report has shown us the many difficulties that countries must face in the global context for implementation of the agenda, which include not only economic factors, but also environmental, humanitarian, natural disasters, and security crises. We welcome this year's IATF report and encourage them to keep working towards discussing mechanisms and good practices aimed at achieving SDGs equally diverse, not the least of which is still deeply entrenched inequalities, from having to ensure our people the most an important part of the international community. Our situation has positive or negative repercussions to the rest of the world. The Monterrey Consensus recommended member states to build transparent, stable, and predictable investment climates. And the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, along the same lines, is also intended to guide business activities and investment decisions with the Sustainable Development Goals. Nevertheless, each country, given its social, economic, and political circumstances, advantages and disadvantages, has historically established its particular development policies aimed at promoting growth in one or another area, which is perfectly accepted within the supply and demand of resources and services in the global economy. The truth is that without investment, in particular foreign direct investment, many of our countries, many middle-income countries, will not be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, facing the same vulnerability that the least developed countries face. National policies must be made not only to create incentives to attract investment, but also to ensure that these investment flows are assigned to areas with a broad positive impact on our population and to provide stability to the global economy. The government of Panama, for many years and with particular emphasis from 2014 when President Juan Carlos Varela took office, has turned to the task of meeting the highest standards of international transparency, including tax cooperation to prevent tax evasion and combat illicit financial flows. Recently, we adhered to the OECD Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance in tax matters. In addition, we are part of the BEPS project, and we have adjusted our regulatory and legal framework for the implementation of measures consistent with these actions. In record time, we have been removed from the discriminatory listing of the Financial Action Task Force, and we are currently applying to the fast track of the Global Forum in order to have the classification revised. In addition, we see as positive the increasing collaborative and coordinated work between the Global Forum and the FATF. The standards promoted by international organizations are in direct direction. The challenge is the harmonious implementation, not only at the international level, but also within each country with respect to the different entities related to each theme. The implementation involves allocating important resources, in some cases to the detriment of the traditional needs of our own countries, including the need to work on tax collection. For our country, it is important that global discussions start to differentiate between tax incentives with substance as a means to attract foreign direct investment necessary for the developing countries against those mechanisms that facilitate tax evasion or pernicious tax incentives. And this is the issue where we would really like to raise the discussion today. We believe that this is an issue not yet at the table for discussion, and it's an issue very relevant to development, and that we need to bring it to the table if we want to ensure that we inadvertently do not make decisions that will end up limiting resources to our own countries to finance the 2030 agenda. Available information on the follow-up of the FFD agenda implementation recognizes that additional public and private investment will be required to meet the large resource needs associated with SDGs, particularly in infrastructure in developing countries. This will generate employment and protect the most vulnerable against cases in this regard. We consider that international cooperation is essential to support the creation of policies to achieve this goal. Traditionally, the least developed countries have used tax incentives as a means of attracting foreign investment, generating employment, transferring knowledge, and other benefits to the country, thereby facilitating the achievement of FDGs. And I want to emphasize on the transfer of knowledge, because the reality is that if our countries are to compete globally, we need to have technology. We need to have access to transfer of technology. And this usually comes along with foreign direct investment, which usually comes along when there are positive tax incentives in place. So our concern is that we do not make decisions that will halt this and have a negative effect on the advancement of the 2030 agenda. Under the new expectations promoted by the international community, the legitimacy of tax incentives is questioned and risk being considered harmful tax practices. We must ensure that this classification does not affect those fiscal incentives that seek to promote the attraction of FDI with substance as genuine means of financing. We are aware of the need to use equally and better instruments to assess tax policy and administrative capacity in our efforts to develop appropriate strategies to strengthen our tax systems. We emphasize the need to take into account the particularities of the economic system of countries that, like Panama, have a platform of services aimed at meeting the needs of the international community, as well as the need to find a balance between fiscal transparency and our commitment to enhance cooperation in tax matters, and fundamentally, the need to generate resources to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. For middle-income countries, such as Panama, it is of particular interest to include these elements in the discussion to ensure an adequate balance between international expectations and the need that we must be met in the fulfillment of the SDGs. For countries to adjust adequately to the requirements of the international community in tax matters, it is essential, in our view, that international efforts take into account aspects such as the need for appropriate transitional periods when material changes in their systems must be introduced. To conclude, we believe that regarding financing for development, there are many relevant issues that are still not on the table. There are many relevant issues that are on the table. We are talking about tax evasion, that is very relevant. We are talking about corruption, that is very relevant. We need to talk in the framework of how to finance this agenda about positive tax incentives and how they are different from pernicious tax incentives, and the role that these tax incentives play in allowing countries to attract foreign direct investment, create employment and growth, and thus be able to finance on our own the sustainable development goals. I'm going to leave it there, and I do hope that we have a fruitful discussion on this matter. Thank you very much.